On August 29, 1949, the country's key policymakers gathered at the Semipalatinsk test center in Kazakhstan, which was then part of the Soviet Union. Everyone in the control room was eagerly waiting to learn about a special weapon. The weapon was codenamed RDS-1. The first nuclear bomb made by the Soviet Union, but whether it would work at all would only be known after its successful explosion. Shortly after its successful explosion, a loud noise shook the ground, and the sky was covered in a column of smoke. Distant villagers thought that a major cyclone was coming. Meanwhile, the test. Everyone at the center could see the face of victory. Their long work had paid off. Now the Soviet Union had also created an atomic bomb. The news immediately reached the United States. They thought that it would take the Soviet Union at least 10 years to discover the difficult method of making an atomic bomb. In such a short time. How did Russian scientists do it on time? The US administration seemed to believe it. It can't do it, but what was stolen? The US administration quickly launched an investigation, and their eyes widened in the investigation. The Soviet Union's atomic bomb, RDS-1, was an exact copy of the atomic bomb dropped on Nagasaki, Fatman. In today's episode, we will learn how the Soviet Union developed an atomic bomb soon after the invention of the US atomic bomb, which later embroiled the two countries in a long-term Cold War. The Soviet Union's research on uranium, the main ingredient of the atomic bomb, began immediately after World War I. This research began at the same time in Germany, America and Britain, but no country was sure how effective such a bomb would be. Therefore, significant progress was seen until 1940. Meanwhile, when World War II broke out, the Soviet Union. The war became a protracted war, so it was foolish for Stalin to put the war behind him and spend time inventing new military forces, which is why all the scientists working in various departments, including the nuclear project, were recruited. The Navy and Air Force were involved in several important research projects during the war. In 1942, the famous Soviet scientist Georgy Flerov noticed suspicious movements in the Western world regarding the nuclear project. He noticed that suddenly no papers on nuclear subjects were being published in America and Britain, which meant that they were secretly working on some big plan. Without delay, Flerov wrote a letter to Joseph Stalin expressing his doubts. Stalin did not take them into account at first, but later, after examining intelligence, he found out that Flerov's ideas were correct. Therefore, even during the dangerous period of World War II, he vigorously launched the nuclear weapons program, which was entrusted to Stalin's trusted physicist Igor Kurchatov. Several years passed, and the Allied countries reached the brink of victory in the World War. In July 1945, at a meeting with US President Roman Joseph Stalin, he said that Japan should be destroyed. They had a new weapon that could destroy them, which was clearly a hint of a nuclear weapon. Stalin didn't even realize it, but that day he pretended not to care about the Soviet Union. Rather, Stalin also said that defeating Japan by any means was more important than knowing what that weapon was. Then in August of that same year, America dropped the little boy in Fatman. Atomic bombs on Japan, letting the whole world know that they had a weapon that could destroy an entire city in an instant. The American atomic bomb, Little Boy, was made of uranium-235. The Soviet Union was basically stuck here, unable to find a way to separate uranium-235 from uranium-238. The Fatman bomb dropped on Nagasaki was also made of plutonium. Of course, the uranium had to be purified to extract the plutonium. However, purifying plutonium from uranium is relatively easy, but it requires a lot of uranium. However, there was no particular speed in the supply of uranium. After the surrender of Germany to Soviet Russia, Soviet soldiers seized a large amount of uranium from there, and a group of German scientists were also arrested, so it was somewhat accelerated with their help. The Soviet Union's nuclear program in 1945, Stalin entrusted all responsibility for the nuclear program to NKVD officer Lavrentiy Beria. So when an intelligence officer was given responsibility for the nuclear program, espionage inside America began. However, Russian spies had been active in America for a long time. They had long planned to steal various information from America using American communists. Some special Russian spies were even trained in such a way that they were working efficiently in the Manhattan Project, America's nuclear laboratory. The name of the Soviet spy David Greenglass is particularly discussed. He established contact with Soviet intelligence through his sister Ethel Rosenberg and her sister's husband Julius Rosenberg. He then began to regularly send various information to the Russians, including the design of the American atomic bomb. Theodore Hull, a young physicist on the Manhattan Project, provided the Soviet Union with important information that opened the door to the long-running Soviet nuclear program. They eventually learned to separate uranium-235 from uranium-238 using electromagnetic and gaseous diffusion methods. Theodore Hull gave Soviet intelligence all the information about the Fat Man bomb dropped on Nagasaki. However, it took a long time to discover this. Even many Americans involved in the research had to risk their lives, but the Soviet Union. Only a few trusted individuals forced the spies to do all this difficult work, and, as a result, they saved them money as well as a lot of time. In addition, two Soviet spies named Oscar Sieber and Russell helped the Soviet Union by providing important information about the uranium enrichment process and the atomic bomb explosion. They helped the Soviet Union with information, but they could not continue their espionage work for long. Julius Rosenberg, Ethel Rosenberg, and David Greenglass were captured by the Americans. Oscar Sieber fled to the Soviet Union, while the Theodore Hull was kept under strict surveillance. Initially, although he denied the espionage charges, he admitted it in an interview a few days ago. Later, the Americans continued their investigation, even interrogating Oppenheimer, the main character of their own nuclear program, and placing him under special surveillance. However, later, it was confirmed that Oppenheimer was not one of the Soviet spies. After the Soviet Union successfully tested their first atomic bomb, the American reaction was the same as after the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. Soviet leader Joseph Stalin knew that America knew too. The Soviet Union would invent the atomic bomb, but it was completely unthinkable that the Soviet Union would steal information so quickly by inserting their own spies into the Manhattan Project. Although the Soviet Union did not directly admit responsibility for the theft of information, the design of their first RDS-1 atomic bomb is easy to understand. It was a knockoff of the American Fat Man bomb. Meanwhile, America did not sit idly by in response to such a feat by the Russians. Instead, they tried to create a thermonuclear weapon, or hydrogen bomb, to surpass the Soviet Union once again. As a result, an intense competition for power and influence began between the two superpowers, which lasted for decades in history, known as the Cold War, and led to several conflicts. The threat of nuclear war also arose. Although the two sides did not finally face each other, there was no preparation for the future. No one gave up. Both countries have been increasing their stockpiles of nuclear bombs for many years. The number of nuclear bombs currently in the hands of the successors of the Soviet Union, the United States and Russia, has the potential to reduce not only these two countries but the entire world to ruins. If World War III breaks out in the near future, add a note. Go to when these two countries use nuclear weapons against each other, then it can be said that the entire world will be destroyed in an instant. Human civilization, which has been built up by biting for so long, will collapse.